Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is, and wherever in the world you may be. My name is Matt Wynn, your podcast host and resident secure identities nerd. Welcome back to the HID Connects podcast. Today's episode is going to focus on the wide-ranging topic of biometric technology. And while we could record an entire series on biometrics, the specific discussion for today will focus on the larger question, are we ready for today's biometrics technology? Now, our main focus areas will include key trends, both technological and regulatory, as well as current barriers to adoption and even what the future of biometrics may hold. So, since there's so much to unpack here, let's just jump right in by introducing our expert panel. So, joining me in person, bright and early from our studio, is Karen Higgins, HID's head of legal. Karen, thanks for joining me in the studio. Mind saying hello to our listeners?
Hey, everyone. It's great to be here.
Excellent. Great to have you. And dialing in all the way from 2023 Eurovision champion Sweden is Kati Bjork, Director of Communications and Solutions for Authentication from our Identity and Access Management Group. Kati, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Excellent. And last but not least, beaming in from the East Coast of the United States is Roland Fournier, HID's Senior Director of Product and Solutions within our Extended Access Technologies Biometrics Unit. Roland, beyond the mouthful of title, thanks for joining. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Very good. Very good. Thank you all for joining. Not sure about you, but I am excited to get started. So let's get to it. All right. So as I queued up, we're going to start with some biometrics trends, which are plentiful, especially in today's environment. So Kati, I'd like to start with you. What are some of the things that you're seeing in the biometrics space? And you've got some good insights in the context of biometrics, passkeys, and the route to passwordless. So share your knowledge with us, please.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. Getting rid of passwords or not having to enter it is something that most of us are trying to do. And biometric is a really good path to that. And if we look at the everyday examples that we have, if you use multi-factor authentication, really often biometric will be there. If you think about your phone, you most likely are using biometric to unlock instead of putting the PIN every time. It's a way to avoid putting in the password. It's a convenience factor. It sometimes even replaces the knowledge, out of MFA by making it just easier for you. In that very similar sense, there's something called passkeys, which I believe is something that will grow and therefore is a trend, but I believe it's going to become dominant. It's basically saying instead of entering a password, you're going to get to enter a pass key. And that's a very smooth process, right? So you will have an application or a website that will offer you that option. So just when you're going to go and put in your password and say, hey, would you like to do a pass key instead? And it's going to say, just put your fingerprint on your reader or scan your face, and it will be saved on the device on which you are. And there you go. This is something that Google, Microsoft, and Apple have already adopted. That's something that HID is able to do on the authentication side. And it's something that will keep growing. And biometric has a huge credit to take for the reason why it's becoming something that people are already willing to do.
Very cool. Perfect segue, Roland, over to you. And you've got a lot of experience in terms of the technology behind the biometric technology. So what are you seeing in terms of technological advancements in this space?
So I think that one of the biggest areas that we're really seeing is sort of the advent of facial recognition really coming to the forefront, coming from the traditional government use cases for identity fraud, for driver's licenses and passports, to really getting into more commercial types of applications. And I think COVID really sort of helped sort of accelerate that whole push to contactless. And as people were going contactless, face was just that natural progression in doing that. Traditionally, I would say several years ago, face was far behind fingerprint biometrics as far as accuracy. And what we've seen with regards to AI and machine learning is the accuracy of face has really caught up to a lot of the other biometrics and fingerprint. And so there's really a lot of really good research and a lot of really good advancements in that area that have really made it accurate and convenient. The other advancements that we're seeing is we're really developing the camera technology to be able to really interact with people and be able to take pictures in all the difficult lighting positions, whether it's really dark outside or whether there's a lot of sunlight behind you, which has been a traditional issue with facial biometrics. What we're seeing now is the camera technology is really caught up in not only being able to handle the lighting conditions, but be able to do multispectral imaging is what we call it, and being able to do near infrared and color to be able to detect whether there's a fraud, whether the person is alive there versus a mask or a paper or your video screen on your phone. And so that not only did we take that technology, but we've also seen the trend of bringing that smarts and facial to the edge. So what that means is we're taking the algorithms and the matching capabilities that were traditionally big server databases and really making and pushing that matching capability to the side of the camera and being able to have that right there and be able to make decisions very quickly, and really improving the user experience overall for face.
Thank you for sharing that. And Karen, Kati and Roland both talked about technological advancements, whether it's on Apple, Google accessing various accounts, or whether it's cameras, facial recognition technology. What are you seeing in terms of regulatory environment keeping up with all this advancement? What trends are you seeing in that regard?
Yeah, so perhaps mine is a little more mundane, but certainly there's the ever expansion of privacy laws and regulations globally. I think we're all pretty familiar with GDPR now, and certainly GDPR regards biometric information as very sensitive data. It's very challenging to commercialize, quite honestly, under the GDPR regime. But it's not just the EU; it's other nations. China's rolled out a very comprehensive data privacy law and security regulations, and then the U.S. While we don't have a unified federal law, there are certainly bills that are percolating and moving up through the system, and states are enacting a patchwork of laws around privacy, laws around security, and laws around AI technology. And so regulators are enforcing in all of these areas. So the trend is certainly the expansion of these laws, the enforcement of the laws. And I think it's, I think that the trend is balancing the importance of protecting the privacy of the biometric data, making sure that companies use the data responsibly, they source the AI technology responsibly. But I think what gets lost at times is that this very biometric information can be used to protect the integrity, the privacy of your identification, of your assets, of your places where you go. That end needs to be respected too, but certainly not to undermine the importance of regulating how companies are using this information, because losing a password is one thing, you can change it. But if a company is irresponsible with your biometric data, that is a problem, and that is scary to people. But we don't want that fear to prevail over all the use cases, and making sure that we emphasize how this information really can secure the privacy of many things.
Very well said. You bring up a great point around this balance between the benefits of biometrics and perhaps some of the fear that goes into it. So we actually conducted a study late last year where we saw that a lot of organizations are very excited about biometrics, but there are a lot of organizations that are very hesitant to even start testing biometric technology. So with all of the talk and promise around the benefits of biometrics, again, there are a lot of people who are reluctant to even start adopting. So Kati, I'd like to start with you. What do you see as some of the main barriers of adoption to biometrics?
Yeah, what's important to say before we start, listing, it's very different when you look at different cases. It's very different if you're looking at companies that are looking to use biometric to address the needs of their customers, or if it's something that they're trying to do to address the needs of their workforce. The regulations are different, the needs are different, the use cases are different, and the acceptance for, giving that information is different. So that's a constant moving target that companies need to see. Now, when it comes to challenges, I like to say that there are three. The reputation, and Karen just touched on it. People are worried. So sometimes the biometric is only stored on that device because it's just making it more simple for the user. there's, usually a bit less to worry about there. It's still important to follow, but that's something that people, have a concern around. So that's something that blocks companies from implementing it or seeing a higher adoption. The second is the consistency, because biometric is highly dependent on the environment on which it's captured. It's dependent on the device. It's the camera, how good the camera is, how good the reader is, and how good, if you're doing sound voice biometric, how much is happening in the background. And then the third is, well, it doesn't apply to every situation, right? So if you're driving a car, you're probably not going to have an easy time to just go and, scan, or, voice might be better for you if it happens to be something that can be done, but it doesn't apply to every situation. So those top three.
Thank you for sharing that. Roland, same question to you around barriers to adoption.
So very similar to what Kati and Karen mentioned, it always kind of starts with privacy concerns in that regard. And when there's lawsuits that have happened because of in various states, some of the commercial customers are very apprehensive in really understanding that. And so it's a lot about education and communication with not only the employees, but also the end consumers with regards to how biometrics is being used. Again, user acceptance and usability is really critical to this as well. So really working with this, the customers really need to look at their stakeholders in the business for their use case, and really understand how biometrics is being used, and educating if their employees are using biometrics for time and attendance, for example, or a point of sale for anti-fraud purposes. How biometrics is helping the overall business, as well as what the biometrics is being used for and collected, et cetera. And then on the user experience side as well, the sort of the best practices with regards to biometrics is looking for partner and companies that have, I'll say, a kind of a modular approach. So start small based on the various use cases, get comfortable, understand the consent, understand education in their use case, and then build upon the capability and the expanding the solution within their environments. I think those are critical points.
Great. Thanks, Roland. Karen, back to you. What are your thoughts on barriers to adoption?
Yeah, and as Roland touched on, companies are fearful of some of the laws and how they've been enacted and enforced by some class action lawsuits and the draconian damages that can result from it. There is a particular statute in Illinois that I say has been weaponized in some cases, because you don't have to prove any harm or really any exposure of your biometric identifying information, but you can still sue. And the way the statute is currently being interpreted, it can result in hundreds of millions of dollars of losses for a company. So that's a huge risk to take on, and insurance companies are continuing to erode coverage for these type situations. I think another barrier and concern is when this data is hosted in a cloud environment versus the data sitting at the device level. As more and more companies want to roll out hosting of this information, people then think of the cybersecurity aspects to that. And if there is an incident that occurs and that information then is exposed, that is a scary thing. And as we touched on reputationally, it's hard to recover from that. But it's also hard to navigate the patchwork of laws around the world and the local data hosting requirements, that you would have to stand up different cloud environments and country. You have to navigate the variances to the laws, how they're enforced. And so there's a lot of complexity to it. And some companies aren't willing to challenge that risk, even though there is a huge upside as well.
You bring up excellent points across the board around why companies may be reluctant to adopt. But I also think there's something interesting to talk about around just everyday users becoming more and more willing to adopt. For the longest time, I refused to use any type of Face ID with my iPhone or even the fingerprint because I didn't want Apple to have my data, right? And then whenever I was trying to get back into traveling and going through airports and I was having to go through the long security lines, I finally acquiesced and signed up for Clear and was like, you know what? This is actually worth it. I can get through the line. I don't have to wait an extra hour at the airport. You can have, quote unquote, my data. It's worth it. So as we kind of go along this adoption curve and knowing a lot of these very important barriers to adoption on the company side or the organizational side, what best practices do we suggest for teams looking to introduce or increase their use of biometrics? And to really complicate that question, how do we balance security, privacy, compliance, and of course, user convenience? So Kati, I'll start with you on that question.
Sure. I mean, the real answer is you have to make it easy for people to do the right thing. That's where it starts, right? And then you need to have the right security for the right users based on regulations, laws, use case that they have. And if you have the right security and the right technology for the right users, instead of trying to go one size fits all, you're already getting ahead in your strategy in terms of implementing your whole security within your enterprise or, your channels to perhaps avoid people trying to circumvent what you're trying to do. Again, biometric gives you a leg up in terms of user experience. You're already ahead. But if you try to do the same thing for everybody and make it too complex, people will find ways around it. So that's the way to start, the right security for the right user.
Very good. Roland, what's your take? Best practices, how do we strike that balance?
So I think it all starts. So user experience is the key, right? So whether that's biometrics or any other kind of technology, so that is really needs to be the focus for the end user standpoint to really reduce that level of friction. The foundation of that is with regards to all the privacy, but companies really kind of communicating to our customers that we have a privacy security by design. Our products from a technology perspective, it may be facial biometrics, maybe fingerprint biometrics, et cetera. But the underlying is that we develop, a very secure, products that are use encryption, really use consent, and really help to make that very easy. And then create different components that allow resellers, our end customers, to integrate into their applications to make biometrics as seamless as possible to what Kati was talking about, and really kind of tailoring it to their various use cases or maybe even their geographic regions. As Karen kind of pointed out, the various privacy laws are different across the globe. So
make it easy to implement and sell the value. Makes sense. Karen, what's your take on this one?
In terms of best practices, it's kind of the full life cycle of biometric technology that it starts with the AI that you're sourcing. You have to be responsible, understand where did those data sets come from? Is there concerns of built-in bias? How do we navigate those challenging questions that all companies are trying to figure out? There's no easy answer there, but it starts at that level. It starts from the very beginning of the process and during the development of the biometric technology. And then from there, that's already been touched on, is making sure that we as HID and other companies are following leading standards to comply with privacy and security requirements, that we try to de-identify the data as much as you can through encryption and other methods. Again, just making sure we emphasize that it's privacy concern, it's security concern, and we need to, continue to convey that information, give customers that comfort level to the extent we can, and also helping foster other companies and advice, not legal advice, but ways to navigate some of these laws in terms of transparency, of notice of the information, if there is needed consent to use the information, that the products also come with those helpful user guides, if you will, to help give consumers some comfort, but also companies and the downstream sales process of these products. But it's a very holistic path, and along each aspect of that path, security and privacy are behind it, and the ethical considerations need to not be lost as well.
Just do it the right way.
Right.
So Karen, sticking with you, let's kind of take a pause on what's going on today, and let's look into the crystal ball moving into tomorrow and beyond. So I say simple question, that is a short question, but what do you see for the future of biometrics?
I think, and I hope that ultimately biometrics will be seen as a way to secure the privacy and to enable an easier way to access your things, the places of business, and protecting your identities. That ultimately that will drive the continued development and adoption of biometrics. I do think that we'll be able to overcome some of these challenges. And I certainly, have seen so many advancements in this area and strategies to, I think, bring a comfort level and expanding that adoption that I think will happen. I mean, look at like Clear. People seem to be comfortable with that, and I think with enhanced security is behind it, but it's easy. And so those things will continue, and the use cases will continue to expand. That's what I envision.
I like it. Roland, what's your take on the future of biometrics?
So I think the trend that's already started with COVID is really going to be is really going to evolve around sort of the seamless and contactless, right? So that whole evolution is going to continue. We're really starting to see, facial go from, very government focused to some more commercial use cases. You're starting to see a lot of facial and seamless to really help the flow in the airport. I think you mentioned that earlier. And things like intent detection, as someone's approaching a door, for example, be able to say, is that person intending to do that, and have it very seamless that we go ahead and identify that person and give them access rights, and in those types of use cases. Fraudsters are always going to try to circumvent the system. So you're going to really see not only liveness detection really get more towards the mobile devices, but how do we attack deep fakes and those kinds of things that are going ahead and creating these videos of people that look just like Roland. And then really on the contactless side is other modalities, such as either sort of a palm that we kind of saw some early use cases with Amazon trying to use the palm for paying inside of stores, just really helping to kind of make biometrics part of your everyday life and very unintrusive. So we'll continue that trend that into the future.
Excellent. And that would be a great podcast episode of itself. So Roland, stay tuned. We'll have you back. Kati, your thoughts. What's the future hold?
Yeah. So the crystal ball tells us behavioral biometrics is something that is already available today and is growing. And to touch on what Karen said earlier, you have to make it easier to protect. You have to make it easier for the user. I often like to say that you have to be able to offer the best security without compromising the user experience. And that's what behavioral biometrics gives you, right? We're familiar with physical biometric, where, the fingerprint, face, the eye scans, but now you're able to actually use your behavior online to help identify who you are, identify those behaviors, the things that are usual for you, so that perhaps if somebody else has access to your credential, they won't act like you. They won't do things like you. And that can help protect. That's an additional layer, right? So it's a different way of doing biometric. Another piece is, we're seeing a lot of development, touching on what Roland was saying on the AI-driven facial recognition, this liveness aspect of things, which Roland was talking about. That's used a lot. Both of those technologies we see in the banking field growing, a lot of interest. And It's because it's making the life of even the people in the background that are working to protect easier.
More use cases, more verticals, more people impacted, all in the name of security and user experience. Okay, cool. Future seems bright, but complicated at the same time, which is probably true for all of our lives, but that's okay. Kati, let's stick with you. And that is final thought, which just happens to be a question that is the title of today's episode. Coming out of the crystal ball and coming back to today, when it comes to biometrics, in your opinion, are we ready for today's technology?
I think the best is yet to come, and we're ready to make our lives easier.
Very succinct. I like that. Roland, same question. Are we ready for today's biometric technology?
Absolutely. And as Kati mentioned earlier, you have to pick the right biometrics for your right use case and the right scenario. So having a vendor that has a choice, whether it be finger, face, behavioral biometrics for your various use cases, and have a very modular approach will really help customers be ready and be able to implement the right level of biometrics for their various use cases.
Choice matters. Okay. And Karen, you get final word because we dragged you in here to the studio bright and early on a Friday morning. So final word goes to you. Same question. Are we ready for today's biometric technology?
I'm going to have the most concise answer. Yes.
I love it. What a better way to end the work
And a
week.
lawyer made it short. That doesn't always happen.
Put that on the record. That's a legal thing, right? Excellent. Well, thank you all, everyone on our panel, Karen, Kati, Roland, for sharing your thoughts and your perspectives on this important topic that will, as we've discussed, only grow more relevant as time goes on. And as always, an even bigger thanks to you for joining us and listening to this episode. Even on a Friday morning, we truly enjoy creating this podcast and hope you equally enjoy listening. Now, while you're with us, be sure to subscribe to HID Connects. Doing so will ensure that you stay connected and not miss future episodes, and you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And in the spirit of connection, send us your questions, ideas for future episodes and different topics. All you have to do is drop me a line at media@hidglobal.com. So until our next episode, thanks again for listening. May your identities forever be secure.